Weirding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 152 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning, talking to you here from my house in London, England. It's the 28th of July, and this is the first episode for a little while. So, firstly, an apology. Things just got a bit crazy around here with work and family and 50th birthdays, and then had a few health things going on. So it's just, it just slipped past me. I just couldn't find the time to get the podcast edited and uploaded. But the good news is, this is a great episode. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. The podcast is dedicated to preserving film history, the stories behind the scenes, and you can treat this and the 151 episodes before it as an archive of entertainment and research. I hope you find it enjoyable. For the regular listeners, thank you as always for joining me and for your continued support. A special shout out to the wonderful people supporting the podcast via Patreon, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Your support is absolutely crucial in keeping this podcast going. Let's say going strong. I'm aiming for at least another 50 patrons to make this financially viable. So if you love the podcast, and I know there are people that love it, there's plenty of you out there listening, and would like to buy me a pint or a coffee if we met, consider doing the equivalent of that by supporting the podcast for about $12 for a whole year. That would be 24 episodes. You can look at the other tiers on Patreon as well and see what kind of suits you. If you can't support the podcast in that way, you can go and grab some exclusive merch. I'll put the link in the show notes. And if neither of those is your thing, you can still support the podcast by sharing it, liking it, subscribing, leaving a review, commenting on the YouTube version. This is just me, this is a small independent podcast, and it thrives on your help in spreading the word. Now, for this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with John Goodson. John is a model maker and a digital artist who spent more than 3 decades at ILM, most recently working on Mandalorian and Grogu, but he worked on Star Treks and Star Wars prequels and Rogue One and Transformers, a whole bunch of stuff. And we talk about his sort of childhood obsessions with Lost in Space and Starlog magazine, and how a friendship formed, which eventually led him to ILM's door, and the first terrifying few days in the model shop, which he goes into some detail about. And also there's a great story about a decommissioned Air Force base, a 33-foot Zeppelin model, some kerosene and a cherry picker, and and the disaster that ensued. This, by the way, is part 1 of 2. John is in a situation where he can't always get a good connection at the moment, so we actually lost the call connection and couldn't get it re-established the night that we did this, and he's agreed to come back on and talk more about the later work as well. So you'll hear right at the end there, you'll just hear him stop talking mid-sentence, but hopefully it's tantalizing enough to want to listen to part 2 when that comes along. So here's part 1 of my conversation with John Goodson, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. John, actually, I'm going to just bring up, before we start, I actually met you very briefly at Skywalker Ranch in 2023. I was being given a tour by
Lorne,
Max Smith and Lorne Peterson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Lorne and you were surprised to see Lorne. I think you were in the middle of shipping stuff out of the archive. Maybe there was some museum stuff involved. But I think at that point, he said, you should get John on the podcast. And it's only taken us 2 years, but we're
Well, I'm at the ranch pretty much every single day, and Lauren would just appear, and I'm like, why don't you tell me you're coming? So I was surprised when he just popped up.
Yeah, that was really sweet of him. I said I was coming, and I'd interviewed him a couple of times, and he said, I'll come and I'll give you a tour, and he just turned up, and it was great. Yeah, it was very good. Right. John, thanks so much for joining me. I love your work. I love to speak to people's work I really admire. But I also want to sort of go back to the beginning and find out like where this was all sparked from. Did you live in a kind of creative household? Were you a creative kid? Where was that kind of first spark of imagination to enter the industry?
So the thing I remember clearly was when I was about 3 years old, there was an episode of Lost in Space called The Derelict that came on, and it had the Jupiter 2 gets taken into this giant alien spacecraft. And once it's inside, it was all dark and kind of creepy. And the Jupiter 2 basically filled frame. And that made such an impression on me when I was really little. And that's the first thing like that I can recall. Then the other thing was that somebody gave us a 3-page color flyer about the Saturn V rocket, because that was when the moon missions, that was all that was all coming together. And those were really intriguing. And then my dad was in the Air Force, and he was a surgeon. My mother was a homemaker, but she did painting, she did a bit of sculpture. So there was that window into you can make stuff, And so we moved to we were on Air Force Base, and the next door neighbor was a fighter pilot. He got me watching Star Trek. And somebody got me a copy of the book, The Making of Star Trek. And I was 5 or 6. And so I got right away, this stuff wasn't real, but there was an industry where people did this stuff. And I thought that was fascinating. And so I remember Space in 1999, I begged my grandmother, we were in a grocery store, and there was Starlog, I think it was issue number 7. And it had a picture of the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter on the cover. It was that promotional shot they used all the time. And I didn't know what Star Wars was, but there were pictures in there of Brian Johnson and Nick Alder with the Eagle spacecraft models from 1999. And that was what I wanted, because there wasn't much reference available. You didn't find pictures where you saw people relative to the miniatures. And here these guys were holding these 3 different sizes of Eagles. And I had to have it. So she bought it for me. And then in there was a story about this movie called Star Wars. And I thought, this looks really interesting. So I was there opening day and saw it. And then it was in the theater. And back then the movies would stay in theaters for like a year. And I think I saw it 31 times in a year. And I would start writing letters to ILM going, hey, I want to come and work for you guys. They'd write me back, man, thank you for your inquiry. Your letter's on file. You don't need to write us anymore. And so, I was 14 years old. But so that was kind of where it all really got going. And in the back of the Art of books that came out back then, and again, there wasn't that much reference information. So the Art of books were gold because they had photographs of the models, the matte paintings, costumes, artwork. And in the back, there were bios of a lot of the people that worked on them. And in those bios, a lot of it they were either architecture or industrial arts. And so that was kind of how I tailored my college curriculum. I went to NC State, the School of Design. And, frankly, that was really interesting. But the stuff I was doing, School of Design didn't really change any of that much in terms of what I wanted to do in terms of building models. So that was how that got going. So, and then it led to a job at ILM.
It sounds like you didn't have a chance, really, John.
I knew what I wanted to do. Very clearly, I knew what I wanted to do. It was just, and my dad, bless him, he's a surgeon.
Yeah. And it sounds like you had the right influences there from your parents as well. You've got the kind of artistic side, you've got the technical side. It's sort of approaching you from both sides. And you've got that perfect combination of engineer and artist. But how did you then, having the intention to get into that field is one thing. And being knocked back, of course, is something that often happens when you write letters to these companies. How did you sort of end up at ILM? What was that story?
So I went to high school with a fellow named Tony Hudson, and Tony and we kind of recreated the Hoth, the Walker battle. So we built a big snow set in one of my bedroom, and we had a folding picnic table, and that whole top of that was snow. We had another table behind it that was snow, so we could stand up between the tables to do the animation. And I built 3 different size walkers. And the walkers, they made a poster paper, cardboard, and mat board, because paper was the medium I could afford to work in. But one of the walkers was about the size of the filming. It was about 22 inches. And there was a 9-inch, and there was a really tiny one, which I still have. And we made a little beam splitter so we could add in lasers and things like that. And so we did that stuff together. And, at that point, I was like 7th grade or something like that. And we both said, if either one of us gets to ILM, you got to let the other guy know. Well, a few years later, it been about 85, I think, Tony got hired in the Creature Shop. And so I came out, spent 5 weeks, and stayed on Tony's couch and went to work with him pretty much every day. And I got to spend an hour with Greg Jean And Greg Jean was the model supervisor on Close Encounters, 1941. He worked on most of Chris Nolan's movies until his passing about 3 years ago. But he was big in Star Trek. And Greg was a huge model, script, prop, artwork collector. Huge. Greg had 2 houses that were side by side with two-car garages. The yards were full. The houses were full. The garages were full. There was a van in the driveway that was full, and he had 5 storage units. I mean, it was, and when you looked at, and it was piles of stuff, but I mean, when you looked at it, it's like, is that the original this or that? Oh yeah, that's it. It was unbelievable. And so I got an hour with Greg. He was working on Batteries Not Included at ILM at the time. Got an hour with Steve Golly, hour with Charlie Bailey, hour with Izo Young, and an hour with Warren Peterson. And, they're all really great. There wasn't a job at the time, but Greg said, he goes, I had a year left in school. He goes, go back and finish school. This is going to be here when you get back. So I did, and that was good advice. And Greg was a really good mentor all through my career, and a lovely human being, one of the nicest people I've ever met, and always supportive. And he helped get me into the academy. He got me connected with Paramount, so I was restoring what Star Trek stuff they still have. So over the years, there's been a number of things I've done for them. But he was just a great influence. But that was really good advice. So I went back and finished school, and then moved back out here without a job, and got here and got hired to come in for a week on Body Wars, which was like Star Tours, but you get miniaturized and put into the human body. And so in that week, kind of segued into about 31 years as an employee of Lucasfilm.
So you joined the model shop there in the peak of its influence in a way. I mean, you're working alongside Bill George and Lorne Pearson, and like you said, your contemporaries in Greg Jean as well.
Yeah.
What was the culture of that shop like at the time? And, what did you absorb from those people that still kind of informs the way you work today?
I learned so much from those folks, and it was really interesting. The model shop was a great place to be because people shared what they knew. And we had so many people from so many different backgrounds, and all those different things combine. I mean, it's alchemy. All these things combine to make magic, and, people who literally came from such random and different backgrounds, and all of that played into it. Everybody's life experience played into it, and people were very sharing, and you just learned constantly. And I always had this vision in my head that I've got this thing that's like a quiver. You put arrows into it, but it actually hangs under my arm, and you would learn something and you'd put that in your quiver, and you're constantly feeding this thing. And when I got to ILM, I thought I knew how to paint. I did not know how to paint. And I got there and I was really perplexed because they used this hideous paint called railroad colors, and everything was kind of matte and ugly. And I was like, this stuff is terrible. That was because of blue screen. You couldn't have reflective surfaces. And so, by working in that environment with people like Bill and Lauren and Larry Tan and, Steve and all those guys, by osmosis, you learn, you get a sense of what things are supposed to look like. What level of texture does it have or need to have to look good on film? And so just by the process of being immersed in that environment and working with all these incredibly talented people, you learned how to develop that look. And it was one of the things, the model shop was so wonderful because it was all about problem solving. And that was what made it really interesting. But you also worked with such a wonderful group of people. And what I think is really interesting is the model shop still gets together on a regular basis. We see each other more than once a year, and that is something that model shop's been disbanded for like 15 or 16 years. And essentially it's this big extended family, so, and I am so thankful for all of that.
Yeah, I've seen some of those photos of the get-togethers. They always look like there's so much, well, you've got so much shared experience and you just got this kind of shared language with each other. You can see that there's love between all of you and admiration for each other's work, and it looks like a really friendly environment. But when you first walked in there, I mean, you're in this place you've dreamed of being. What was the first thing you were tasked with doing? And did you feel nervous? Did you feel like I'm up to this? What was that first day like?
Oh, I was scared shitless. I mean, I got there. Larry Tan was doing the Body Wars ride, and so I got there in the morning and I went into reception, and Larry came down and met me, and he said, "Okay, wait down here. Jeff Mann will come and get you." I had met Jeff when I'd been there previously at 86 when I was there staying with Tony. So this was August of 88. So I sat in the lobby and Jeff never materialized, and it got to be lunchtime. And here came Larry trotting through the front office, and he goes, "Did Jeff not come down?" He goes, "No, I never saw him." He goes, "Well, come with me." So he goes, "Follow me." So I start following Larry, and he goes, "I'm going to give you to Steve Golly." Steve hates rookies, just so you know. And I'm like, great. So he takes me in the wood shop, and there's Steve. And Steve hands me this piece of paper with the miniaturization platform on it. He goes, build this. And he walked out. I don't know where the bathroom is. I don't know how to get back out of the building. I don't know where anything is. Suddenly I'm standing in the wood shop by myself, and I'm like, okay. So I walked out in the hall, and I saw Dennis Mirren, who I recognized from seeing him on making of, and I said, can you point me to the model shop? So finally took me up to the model shop, and I went in, and Bill George was in there. So Bill and I talked for a minute, and I said, I'm going to make this thing. He goes, well, why don't you sit here? It was Eric Christensen's old desk. Eric was not there anymore. So I sat at Eric's desk, and for 3 days, I tried to be the invisible man, because I thought if they figure out I'm in here, they're going to throw me out. So I started building the miniaturization platform, but as quietly and as invisibly as I could. And on the 3rd day, I think I was going to use the restroom, I ran into Jeff in the hall. He goes, hey, was I supposed to talk to you? I'm like, yeah, do I work here? And he goes, oh, yeah, you're working here. I'm like, okay, good. So for 3 days, I had no idea if I was really there or not. So that was the beginning.
Wow. Baptism of fire. Steve really sort of dropped you in there and just said sink or swim.
I'm out of here.
Was that very Steve?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I know Steve really well. I see Steve pretty regularly. So, he's just, like Lauren said, or Larry said, he hates rookies. And I was like, okay, give me the drawing. And he walked out. And I'm like, okay, now I have no idea what to do. I don't know where to go, but I was able to do it. So it all worked out. So.
Yeah. And I'm sure being so keen and so young as well that you were putting in the hours, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was a dream come true to be there. Like I said, I tried to be invisible for those first 3 days because I thought if they figure out I'm here, they're going to throw me out, and I don't want to leave, So it was, when I actually had a job, I was like, that was incredible. I couldn't believe it. Here are all these people, because, there wasn't that much making of stuff. When Star Wars came along, there was a lot more of that. Not that there was that much of it, but that sort of stuff wound up on regular television. There were these specials where it was all about the making of Star Wars. So these were these guys I was watching that were showing all these behind the scenes things. And here I was in the same space with them. I still don't believe it. I was sitting there the other night. I took my daughter to the premiere of Mandalorian, and I went to that. I'm living on this ship. I don't have a great wardrobe. I wore a San Pedro t-shirt that had the walker and one of the cargo cranes here, and it says, I am your father. That's why I wore the premiere. I also didn't expect to be doing the kind of prep thing. They're like, 15 minutes before you get there, hit this text and we'll send you to the press and photo area. I'm like, I didn't come dressed for that. So wound up doing it. But I was sitting there when the movie ended. John Favreau came out at the beginning and spoke to everybody, and the credits were rolling, and I saw my credit go by, and it still doesn't seem real that I'm in the film business. And it's been 36 years, but it still doesn't seem real. It is such a dream come true. It really is. It's just, I am thankful for every bit of it, and I'm so aware of how lucky I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember that first moment of seeing your work on the screen? Like, oh, that was mine. Do you remember?
There's a strange thing that goes on with that, where I always have a disconnect, because I see the stuff on screen. I'm like, that can't be the one I built. It's just there's some magical intermediary process that happens, and the one on screen is something different. I still get that vibe, but yeah, it's cool. It was funny. The Mando movie, it was really gratifying to see that ship on screen, because we really get to see it. And, we went from a model shop the model shop hovered around between 40 and 60 people. And we ballooned up to something like 110 during Phantom Menace. And a model like that would have involved, 30, maybe 40 people. Because you had, sculptors, electricians, mold makers, painters, all these different things. And now it's me and Dan Petrascu putting these things together. Every time we do it, I'm like, I don't know how we're doing this. I don't know how we're pulling it off. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, but it's kind of sad too, because I miss those people. I miss getting to work together like that a lot. That was one of the things, and that's why we also didn't get together, because we really integrated as a group, and those relationships mean a tremendous amount. And I miss getting to work with him. Larry's the guy that hired me. Larry, actually, I asked Larry if he'd come and help us some on Mando, and he came in for a couple of weeks and helped us out with some things, and that was fantastic, because Larry had not worked he hadn't worked on miniature for film in 25 years. So that was really sweet having him there. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Great to bring in all that experience, working together, as you say. That's the thing. When you're working on these jobs that can be quite intense, having just good people around you make such a difference. Doesn't it? I work in live TV, and it can be very stressful. I work on Formula One, so I have there could be 500 million people watching a race, and if I do something wrong, everybody sees it. Um, so having good people around you to support you and kind of keep you kind of level is so important, isn't it? Did you feel that when you first arrived at ILM that were you surprised by the amount of or the lack of time that you had to work on things? Because obviously there's a deadline. You've got to get this model finished. Was that a surprise to you, as having been somebody who was a hobbyist up to that point?
I don't remember it being really. I mean, I remember the first big thing that I did was I was going to build a model of the Titanic for Ghostbusters 2, and the model was 18 feet long.
Mm.
And I was hesitant to get started. I did a full-size drawing of it, and I kept messing with the drawing stuff. And Bill George said, you have to actually build it. You gotta stop doing this. You got to build it. So I had, and because I was hesitant to do it. And once it got going, it was great, no problem. But yeah, I mean, and film work is such a different animal. And, the production needs, especially when you get on stage. I mean, my God, you realize that, they're paying stage rental, they're paying for the lighting package, DP grips, everybody, all those people are there. And when they're waiting on you, all that money, there's a taximeter at the front of the thing that's spinning at an incredible rate. And if they're waiting on you, you don't want to be that. And so it was amazing to me. Something could happen on stage in 20 minutes that could have taken 2 or 3 days in the shop. But there's an intensity to it. You're literally shaking because you're operating. It's pure adrenaline. You're operating at such a high speed. And it was funny. A few years back, Paul Houston and I wound up doing something for the Agent Carter series for Marvel. And it was a couple of DC-3s.
Yeah.
And it was 2 shots, one of it on the ground in snow. So they were just monogrammed kits I bought, and we put it in baking soda on a 4x4 sheet, and we'd move it 5 degrees, photograph it each one of those increments. And then we had another one that we hung on wires, or it was on fishing line. They had motors in it, and it was a flying shot. And, trying to puppeteer this thing. We went from being this company that had the state-of-the-art motion control equipment to Paul and I are down there. He's got a handheld camera. We got a model hanging on fishing line, trying to make it look like it's gently turning, which doesn't just turn. When you start to do anything to it, it starts wiggling and doing all this stuff. And he said, I can't believe it's come to this. I'm like, I know, it's pathetic. But he said, look around. Nobody's in a hurry. Everybody on the stage was just kind of hanging out. And it's like, we're so used to when you're on stage, you're on fire. And he's like, nobody here, it's not the culture anymore. It's very different. So, and we got the shot, but it was just, I thought, this is pitiful. Fishing line and handheld camera, really? So it's been great to go back and do the TV show. Yeah, well, and have John build these motion control cameras. And so we kind of have that capability again.
The thing is, when that taximeter's ticking along, as you said, it just has to get done, doesn't it? Like live TV that I work in, I'm amazed we get on air sometimes, There can be so much planning and so many sort of obstacles. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've got 10 minutes and bam, we're on air, and everyone's firing on all cylinders. Somehow it just comes together. Was there ever a time, and you don't have to say a specific time, but was there ever a time where, you really felt like it didn't come together?
Yeah, there were a couple. Rocketeer was one where, you know that story.
Just interested to know, because, I think we just assume that everyone is always, always gets there in the end, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Things do sort of fall down around you, don't they?
We did get there in the end, but this is an interesting story if you haven't heard it. So there was a 33-foot model of the Hindenburg, which was called the Luxembourg in the film. And it took about 8 months, and it was Steve Golly was doing that, and I think Ira Keeler and Mike Fulmer. And it was a huge project to build it. And then Larry Tannen and Richard Miller and I came in and did the skinning of it, because it was it was 1/4-inch apple plywood that was laser cut for the internal framework. So there's this complete framework inside of it. And then that was covered with like black cheesecloth, black fishnet. And then on top of that, we used this material called Solartex. And it's a synthetic fabric, and it's heat shrink. So, Larry and Richard were standing either into the Zeppelin, and I would give one of them this 2-foot roll of stuff, and we'd roll it out, and we'd cut off about a 40-foot length of it, and then I had a clear film on it, and I would walk that off. Depending on which direction I went, when I got to the end of that, I had a massive static charge on me. So I would zap either Larry or Richard, and they knew it was coming, and there's nothing they could do. They couldn't put it down. But so we skinned this thing, and then I painted it. It took a week to paint it. And I'm up on scaffolding with a Binks gun running back and forth painting this thing. It's like a tractor trailer, It's not quite that big, but big. And then we took it out to an Air Force base that's local here that was decommissioned, and we had an unobstructed skyline. And the thing, they had filmed live action elements of the Rocketeer and his girlfriend running from the bad guy on top of the Zeppelin. And so it's exploding right behind them. So starting at the nose, it's going towards the tail. When they get to the tail, Howard Hughes flies over in a Pitcairn autogyro, and they jump onto the rope ladder and fly away as the back of the Zeppelin explodes and it crashes. So they'd already filmed the live action of all that stuff. So now we have the model. So we took it out there, and they were going to load 10 bombs in it. There were kerosene and black powder. And there were 6 openings in the bottom of that model where it connected to a dolly we could drive it around with just to move it. And we said, before we were going to take lunch or dinner, whatever it is, it's like 2 a.m. the night shoot. We said to the pyro guys, before you guys load it up with pyro, when you pick it up, let us come and close the bottom. Oh, yeah. So we break for the meal. We come back. It's 25 feet in the air. It's got 10 black powder and kerosene bombs in it. There's kerosene running out of the holes. And now we got to go up there and iron. And we're using the irons that are plugged in, iron the bottom shut. And so, we go to the cherry picker, and Bob Finley Sr., he comes by and he goes, if you see a flash, just 5-second delay before the explosion. I'm like, oh. And then Dave Heron, who's driving the cherry picker, I'm in, goes, if you see a flash, there's a 5-second delay on the cherry picker. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do? And he goes, well, we jump. And I'm like, and what? It blows up and falls on us? And he goes, well, I don't know. So they gave us these Nomex suits that cover everything but your face and your hands, because you don't need those. And we went up, and there's a picture of me in Cinefex magazine with the iron, like just with this mortified look on my face, ironing this thing shut. And there's literally kerosene running out of the holes. And I think Charlie Bailey and one of the Teamsters was in the other picker. So we got it all sealed up. Didn't blow up. We get back down. And now you got about 90 people out there. You got fans, smoke blowers, lights, all this equipment. And I think we had 6 high-speed cameras. And every one of those cameras, you have to get a speed call off of it to shoot 300 frames a second. And once you get all 6 speed calls, action. Then, so they went through all that. We'll do this. We'll turn on the fan, the smoke blower, all this, blah, blah, blah. We'll get the speed calls. And on action, it will go 1 through 10. And when it gets to 10, there's a guy whose only job is to push a button that'll cut the 2 cables and will fall out of frame. So, okay, everybody gets going, fans, smoke going, action, speed, and boom. And it goes 1 and 10. And the guy cuts the cable and it falls out of frame and it blows up on the ground. And in 15 seconds, I think it took 8 months to build it. In 15 seconds, it is this charred rubble pile that Ira and I stuck into a dumpster the size of a desk the next day. I mean, it's gone. And that was the climax of the movie, and it's gone. And I was standing next to Dickie Dova. Dickie was one of our hands. Dickie's dad was a vaudeville performer named Ben Dova. And his dad had been on the Hindenburg when it came over on that last flight. His dad actually shot color film during that last flight. And there's footage of Dickie on his mom's shoulders when the Hindenburg arrived. Dickie was there when it blew up, and his dad survived. But I'm standing next to Dickie, and the thing goes boom, boom, falls on the ground and blows up. And I turned around to Dickie and I said, is that what was supposed to happen? He goes, oh, I don't think so. So that night, made a journal the next day, made the front page. Why visual effects cost so much money. And I don't know if they ever sorted out exactly what went wrong, but a second Zeppelin got built in about 6 weeks with 3 shifts going around the clock. And that's the one that's in the film. So, there's one of those places where it didn't go as planned. They were able to recover, and it worked. But what a stressful evening. And it was just that realization, it's gone. And we did not get the shot, and we only had 1. So, that was a gamble. Usually you build 3 for pilot. So, yeah. Anyway, that's one of those.
Right. Yeah. Lessons learned.
Yeah. It was, and not everything worked. And that's part of the process is, it's experimentation, especially pyro, because I always treat it like a science experiment. You don't know what's going to happen. So it was always fun to try different stuff. And Howie Weed came up with a really good idea. And that was using pasta in pyro stuff because it comes in all kinds of interesting shapes. You paint it. And during the explosion, you can't tell what it is, but it's great debris. And it really, really responds to the shockwave, breaks it all up. So that was a really great thing, but it's all experimentation. And that was a cool thing, you're doing stuff, you're using materials in ways that weren't intended, and wild ideas. I remember we were doing Fire in the Sky, and that was an alien abduction movie with DB Sweeney, I think. It was DB Sweeney. But they had an alien spacecraft, and the way it was described, it was, you're looking at the bottom of it, the character's looking up at the bottom of it, and it's these islands of black with lava flowing between them. And at a certain point, the lava of the islands kind of go away from the center and expose the middle of it, and a shaft of light comes down and gets taken away. So we had a model of the spaceship that was about 3 feet in diameter, which was basically, it looked like a big mushroom cap kind of, and it was a clear plastic one. And then over the top of the clear, it used Bondo and put kind of a shell over it that's about a 1/4 inch thick, and then went back with Dremel tools and carved all these rivulets in it that emitted from the top down the sides and from the bottom towards the top. And then inside of it, we had color gels and we had polarizing gels. And I'd been down on the set for Star Trek The Next Generation, and they had all these flat panel monitors. And I was with Mike Akuda, and I said, and Bill George, and I said, how does this work? We pulled one of them out. And it's literally this polarizing film that's printed on plastic. And then if you take a polarizing wheel, when the polarity lines up and goes in and out of line, it causes animation. So they had all these different samples of different things that would create movement. So having seen that, I put that inside the saucer. And there were about, I think there were like 100, there were 120 lights, 6 cooling fans, 9 spinning polarizing discs, and a thing called a salad bowl in the bottom that had polarizing film in it. So all this stuff is turning in there, and it made the lava appear to come down from the top. It was animated and come up from the bottom. And so for this shot where he looks up and gets sucked into the bottom of it, we took some of this Rippleplex that's like used for shower doors and heated it up on the vacuum former and made it into kind of a dome shape, and it was 4 feet square. Then on top of that, we put pancake syrup. Then on top of that, we took styrofoam, bead foam, and cut it into thin, like 16th inch sections and painted that with black temporary hairspray. And those were the islands, were the rivulets, we'd bottom light this thing. And then right before we would shoot, we had silk. That was it. We laid silk. They were like silk strands that were about 4 inches wide, and they all intersected over the center of it. But when you poured the pancake syrup over it, it became transparent. We stuck the bead foam islands on top of that. And right before we'd shoot, we'd spray it with AB smoke. And you've got this, I don't know if you use it anymore, but it was 2 components. Spray the first component on, and right before you shoot, spray the second on, and you get this really low-hanging smoke. It's smoldering. And it's like, if you see Terminator 1, you see Schwarzenegger at one point, it's sort of drifting around on his head, and that's what it is AP smoke. So that gave us this really interesting low-lying smoke. And then when we went to film, we had about 5 or 6 people around it. Everybody would grab one of these silk things, and then we'd spray it with acetone so the islands would dissolve. And at the same time, we'd pull the silks and right on the pancake syrup, and all the islands would leave from the center and expose that. So it was this crazy setup, but, it gave us what we were looking for, but, it's all experimentation. It was really, that was the fun part. You're always coming up with wild ideas. And I love when we'd bid stuff and it's like, wow, we think it's going to take 66 weeks. I'm like, we don't know how we're going to do it exactly, but we think it'll take this long, but it was always, Steve Golly always referred to it as swag, scientific wild ass guess. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So
it really is a science experiment, isn't it? Every time that's the attitude I always come across with people that worked at ILM was, sure, we'll do it. We don't know how, but we'll find a way, whatever way that turns out being. And it might be something that you then take into the next show, or it might be something you never do again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things, all those experiences, they don't all build towards something, but a lot of them contribute, and that was the cool thing. Everybody's different experience really helped when you blended it all together. You got really interesting stuff from it. And I remember as people were getting poached and going to computer graphics that, prior to that, I felt like we had this amazing machine, and you could plug in a drawing on one end of it and you're going to get something out of the other end of it. And then as people started going away, I was like, they're taking parts of the machine away and it's not going to work as well. And it was very difficult. And then I went to computer graphics, but it was inevitable. It was kind of like the model shop was not the direction things were going. That was very apparent. The digital thing was picking up steam, and that was where all the emphasis was. And there's still room for using miniatures and things like that. But I think a lot of productions, the comfort level, because they don't know practical, the comfort level is to, have it be a digital solution. And, practical people have less experience with it, and it is sort of unpredictable, but, the results tend to be pretty good.
Did you really feel that kind of tide of the digital wave coming towards you, and did you feel that you had to be kind of agile and move into that direction, because that, if you wanted to stay in the industry, that's where you needed to go?
Yeah, at ILM it was like, I always think about the never ending story of the great nothing that's coming, and that's what it felt like. It was like, you know what, and there were a couple times we were really close to being shut down, And one of the things that saved us at one point was we had a commercial division, and commercials, the response time, they're so fast. You turnaround is so quick that without the model shop, we couldn't have done those. And so that was one time that saved us. And then ultimately, I think really what it came down to was there was less and less work for the model shop, but I think also George wanted to remove any kind of a crutch that the model shop provided and force computer graphics to that next step, and that was pretty hard. It was very difficult. Some people retired at that point. Some people didn't make the transition, and it was pretty bleak. I mean, Light and Magic season 2 kind of covers a lot of that, and and it was sad, and I wouldn't go into computer graphics. It was an adaptation, because if you didn't, you weren't going to be working anymore.
When you sort of came back to making models later on, I think of obviously the Mandalorian was one of those. You returned to that physical work. What felt different to you, and what kind of came back immediately?
Well, I never stopped building stuff, so I was always doing things in computer graphics, and there were things that would come up at ILM where I'd do miniatures like that, but not that often. But it was different. The biggest thing was not having the model shop and not having all the people. It was a different world. It's just kind of more solo type thing. I work with one other guy primarily, and Dan, and that's it. That was the hardest part. Not having that camaraderie, not having that team, and I was really sad that somebody didn't step in and acquire the model shop, because you had this talent pool that was phenomenal. And I thought this has value to it, I mean, but nobody did. It was allowed to just dissolve, and that was very sad. So, and the other thing that's different, technology changed a lot. So information, is you're getting it as emails, and you're getting digital renders, things like that. And that's a different animal. And then a lot of the design work is being done digitally too. So elements to it were different, but then so much of it was very much the same.
And I guess you've also got that you've lost that kind of library of objects as well in the model shop, whether it's a tool or whether it's a model or an area you went to because I know I need this thing and I know that's over there in that corner. All of that's gone as well, isn't it? That physical library.
Yeah, I mean, and that's more and more of a challenge all the time, because materials go away. I mean, the other day I went to a hobby shop here in the LA area, and all I wanted was brass wire, and they're like, "Oh, we're having trouble getting it from our distributor." I'm like, "What? I mean, brass wire?" And and I know K&S is a brand of metal materials. They make all kinds of tubing, and it's telescoping tubings and rods and square tubes and all kinds of stuff. And I noticed that those racks, which you'll see in hardware stores, a lot of them they're not restocking them, or altogether gone. And I went the other day to buy some solvent, which I've been using since I've been in the business. And I went to a plastic shop I really like down here in Southern California, and I bought a bunch of styrene and said I need this particular product. They said, "We can't sell it to you." And I said, "What? We can't sell that type of solvent in LA County." And I'm like, "But you're a plastics fabrication facility. I mean, you can't operate without it." And they said, "We're driving to Vegas and buying it and bringing it back because they can't get it locally." So materials go away constantly.
Huh.
The type of primer that you like goes away. I mean, you name it. Railroad colors, which was the primary paint we used at IL, that's been out of production now for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years. So, you have to adapt and try and find other stuff to do the job with. And that's from a guy talked to me the other day. He works in a fabrication facility where they make lucite, and it's large lucite objects, plexiglass. And there was a type of plastic they used, and I can't recall the name of it, but they would vacuum form the part. Then they would use the vacuum forms and cast the lucite into that. And the lucite wouldn't interact with this plastic. And it was their primary means of doing this. That plastic is no longer manufactured, and there's not a substitute. And he is scrambling to try and figure out how they can make these parts, because they have to be baked in an autoclave, and any other plastic will blend into the plexiglass. So they wind up combined, whereas this other material doesn't do that. And they don't have a solution at this point. I don't know what they're going to do. But that's a constant, that the materials keep changing, and it's air quality or environmental reasons. And, if it's really good, if it works great, it's really bad. It's carcinogenic, or it's toxic, or, or both. And so, those things keep going away. And so that substitution process it gets harder and harder to do the same things now.
Yeah, we often talk about, new technologies, don't we? We don't really hear much discussion in the outside world about the technology kind of being left behind. It's really an interesting subject, I think, because one element of that chain is removed, and suddenly you can't do the thing that you can do quickly, let's say, um, because it no longer
Well,
exists.
it even goes on with the newer technology, because I was reading something the other day that in the past, for fighting forest fires, the Forest Service has reached out to the military, and they've gotten ex-military aircraft to do the fire missions and that sort of thing. And then I read, they said the limitation is not the hours on the aircraft anymore. It will probably be software that will make it so that the plane can't fly. And so it's really interesting that the obsolescence of this software
Yeah.
makes the plane not usable anymore. And we run into it all the time with equipment. And that was the thing
Mm.
I thought was interesting was I went and talked to a 10th grade class, and I said, you're all going to work in an environment where you're going to use computers. And it's interesting because periodically you're going to get new hardware, and there will be changes that will happen. It's like when you get a new phone, now your printer doesn't work and you can't, all these different things don't function. So it requires buying all new stuff. And I said, so you'll have to adjust to the new hardware. But I said, the software will change way more frequently than that. And you will have to continue to relearn how to do the same job with new software, because it doesn't stay static for long. It's always transitioning. So it's interesting that, materials go away, but then also
Yeah.
support for a lot of these things, it doesn't exist, and it doesn't take very long for it to become obsolete.
And you're in the business as well. Sorry, carry on.
Like
You
I
cut
said,
out for a second, but carry
I
on.
like my old fashioned stuff that doesn't have software, that, it just works.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about like it just working, you've also on the other side of your job, you've got to create these spacecraft, for instance, that actually look like they function as a real vehicle. I think you've talked before. I've heard you in an interview talking before about the mechanical language you kind of
Yeah.
have to instill in these items. Like, how do you go about doing that? Is it a feeling thing? Is it looking at references? Is it a combination of a bunch of things? But how do you sort of, I think of like the ship in Ahsoka. I think you were at Celebration here in London with that model, weren't you?
I know, I was with it at Celebration Anaheim.
Oh, it was Anaheim. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I think of that ship in terms of, it's got sort of mechanical movement in it. And it's another sort of way for us as the audience to just buy it. There's something about a spaceship that you can just buy, whether it's like a snow speeder that's using a flap to turn to bank or whatever. You just, there's those little kind of tricks. Is that something you just learn over time, or is that something you really study hard?
Well, I think really a lot of artists are really good observers. And so you pay attention to a lot of detail.
Mm.
And it was funny because one of the folks was working on an issue on one film, and they had these vehicles, and he was doing design work on it, and the vehicles were cargo vessels, but the whole top of them was flat, and there wasn't anything up there. And he said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to put up here. And I said, if you think about it, it's a cargo vessel. If I had a cargo vessel that had a flat top on it, I would put containers on top of it. I'd use that surface. And I said, why don't you come up with like a track system that goes up there that implies containers? And you don't have to actually execute it at all. But if you do it in a logical manner and it makes sense, that'll telegraph. It'll read. And that's where, if you look at, I remember like Transformers, it was funny when we did the first film, we did them without any damage or weathering or anything like that. And when they're rendered, they look like big computer graphics things. But going back in and putting the metal scrapes and the oil leaks and all those things on it, all those real world cues help convince you that this thing is functional and that it's real. And I always say that the job in visual effects is we're liars. And if we've done our job well enough, you don't realize you've been lied to. But, conveying all those real world elements, that's why weathering is so important, with vehicles and things, because that convinces you it's real. It also helps define the scale. Every one of those things, anything you can do that gives you an advantage in terms of making it more realistic, giving it a level of texture that reads like a real thing, and implying mechanical language. I love how the Millennium Falcon is covered in model kit parts, and you don't know what any of it does, but the way it's put on there, it implies that there's a function to it. It looks like it does something. And there was a film called Star Crash that came out right at the same time as Star Wars. It came out shortly after the first Star Wars. And they made spaceships, but it looked like they covered them in glue and then rolled them through a vat of model kit parts. And that was it. And it's like, it so doesn't work because there was no sensitivity to kind of trying to create a mechanical language that makes sense. There's a certain charm to it, but it doesn't look real.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that thing of taking all what's
Yeah.
from the real world, putting into these fictional things and using them to convince you that it's real. Well, we did a kit bash class, and it was interesting because people thought we gave them some basic shapes, model kit parts, and some people just glued stuff all over it. And then Keith London was in charge of the model shop. And he said, let's do this. Let's give them all a camera, disposable camera, and have them go out and photograph examples of mechanical language. And that was such a great idea. And that was such a good thing to point them towards because it gave them something. Go out in the real world and photograph stuff with garbage. Is that all the hydraulic cylinders, all that stuff? That's mechanical language. That's what you're after. So that was really interesting, to try and kind of get that idea across. But I love things like the Falcon where all that stuff's on it. You don't know what it does, but it sure looks like it does something important.
Yeah. And you mentioned weathering there. And what interests me about that is that how much did you find that change between film and digital, like what the camera would sell to the audience as weathering? Did you have to change those techniques when you moved from film to digital?
In terms of the projection medium,
Yeah.
yeah, it was terrifying because, before Phantom Menace, that was the first thing we shot digitally. And you could, put a piece of black tape on something. Our rule of thumb was, unfocus your eye a little bit. That's what film sees. Close your eye and that's what TV sees, and then digital came on the scene. Like, oh my God, that piece of black tape is obviously a piece of black tape. And it was, there was a learning curve there for sure to adjust to that because it was very different. The field seemed like you could see everything digital. And, the thing that at first it was very difficult for me doing the computer graphics thing. And I don't know if I ever got all that good at it, but we switched to a paint software called Mari. And Mari allowed you to paint in layers of materials. And that was such a huge advantage. And I remember painting the Y-Wing and the U-Wing on Rogue One. It was fantastic because you could go in and I could have a layer that was, brushed aluminum. I could have a layer that was called clay, which I rename as primer. Then I had a layer that was, semi-gloss car paint. And I could sit there and do scratches on the surface that exposed the metal, exposed some of the primer, and then you had the car paint on top of it. Way better than doing it as a practical model for me. I was like, this is amazing. I could do greasy handprints because there was an oil material. And all you had to do is go find a photograph of a fingerprint or handprint. And if it's black and white, whatever was white was that material. So you'd have the whole shit black and have these handprints on it assigned to an oil material. And now you've got oily fingerprints. I mean, it was amazing. So it was better than the real thing. So that was really, really cool. I loved that. So it was too bad. That was right about the time I left. It was right when when I finally connected with it and like, wow, this is amazing. You're out. So.
But then you've since come back making models. I mean, like, talk to me about the Razor Crest because it's sort of, in the public eye and under scrutiny at the moment with the new film in IMAX there. But the Razor Crest started out for the TV series, of course, The Mandalorian. And didn't that, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't that start out as a 3D printed?
Yes, it did.
Assembly, and then it wasn't kind of like strong enough, so you had to sort of revert back to kind of original mold making techniques. And
it had a couple things going on. It was, I think that the main body was like 52 pieces. So 52 prints, and they were all done fairly quickly, and they were all, build lines, they're all done differently. These things have got build lines running in different directions all over it. And I'm going to skin it in aluminum. Every one of those build lines is going to read right through the aluminum. So they can't be there. And so it was a question, I had to put it all together, steam all of the gaps, and then keep spraying it with sandable primer and sanding it to get rid of the build lines. And by the time you get through doing all that, starting to lose detail, things are starting to go away. And it was just a byproduct of that being the process. And a 3D print like that is not strong enough to take out on stage, in my opinion. And you need to cut out mount doors and things. You've got to have doors that are basically invisible. You have left, right, top, bottom, front, back, typically. And the 3D print, you can't drill it. It would shatter, and so you can't use the material that was coming out of the hole. You can't cut it out and reuse that door. And then they were going to print them. I'm like, they won't be flat. I guarantee they won't be flat. So once it was all cleaned up, seamed, and primed, then I made a big 2-part mold of it and I recast it in epoxy fiberglass.
Well, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my conversation with John there. As I said, we got cut off mid-flow, which is frustrating, but also a good sign. It means there's plenty more to come. And part 2 is being recorded in the next couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward to getting to, the Razor Crest build and all the proper detail behind that and the latest techniques that he was using, along with all the techniques that he's learned over his career. Coming up on the podcast, I've got some great guests, including a composer, a very, very big film series, if you like. Well, the first 2 anyway. I actually met him whilst working on my Joe Al's documentary. He's actually married to somebody that was in Jaws 2, who we interviewed. More details on that later. Keep the support coming. I do need you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
We are being way mean